Well, very simply, I work for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Agricultural Research Service. I've been in the same job for the last 30, almost 35 years, 34 years now. And so I very much enjoy the work I do. It's mostly associated with fermented and acidified foods and pickled vegetables. And I've really enjoyed the kind of work I do. And I like the opportunity to travel as well, and very much enjoy kimchi. I've worked for many years on cucumber fermentations, pickle fermentations. We also work on sauerkraut fermentation, and the kimchi fermentation and the sauerkraut fermentation are virtually indistinguishable from a microbiological standpoint. Flavor-wise, very different, but from microbiology, it's very similar. And about 15 years ago or so, I was asked by the Department of Agriculture to investigate the safety of many different kinds of vegetable fermentations. Not because they considered it to be unsafe, but because the Food and Drug Administration, FDA in the US, was interested in knowing how should we regulate products like this? Should there be safety concern? They didn't know, and they didn't know much at all about the microbiology. And because we had worked so much on fermentation microbiology, they asked me to look at the food safety aspects of kimchi, of sauerkraut, pickles, all different kinds. And so I did that for a number of years. We did a lot of tests looking at how acid-resistant pathogens, organisms that cause disease in humans, E. coli, salmonella, listeria, we looked at how those organisms die off and can be killed in kimchi, as well as sauerkraut, pickles. And this information was then given to FDA, was published in peer-reviewed journals, and it helped them make science-based regulations. And that's what we really want. We don't want arbitrary regulations. But FDA had no experience, no expertise with this kind of stuff. So I did a lot of that. And recently, I've been looking at how you can predict pH and pH changes in fermentation, as well as foods that are acidified. When you add acid to cucumbers and you make acidified pickles, they're not fermented, but they're pasteurized. And so I wanted to know, and a lot of people in the industry wanted to know, if we add, how much acid do we have to add to get a certain pH? Or when it's fermenting, how quickly will it get to a certain pH? Or if all the sugar gets fermented in cucumbers or something, what will the pH be? So we developed something called buffer model. And this is a little more abstract and more scientific, but and there's a lot of math involved in it, but it's a way that we can actually make those kinds of predictions. And I really enjoy that kind of work because I like playing with computers and modeling and stuff. So I've been doing a lot of that lately. And that's what I was recently invited to Korea last year to Gyeongju for microbiology biotechnology meeting to talk about that work. And I then got a chance to go to Gwangju to visit once again WeKim and see my colleague Dr. Park there. So when you ferment sugar, the bacteria that do the kimchi fermentation, as well as pickles, as well as sauerkraut, and many other kinds of vegetable fermentations, have one basic mode of operation. They take sugar and they make acid. And the vegetable material actually has a lot of sugar in it. Cabbage has about 4% of the weight of cabbage is free sugar. And pickles, it's about 2%. Cucumbers, it's less. And so the question is, how quickly will the pH go down as the bacteria do this operation? And there's different kinds of bacteria in kimchi. It's not so simple as cucumbers. You have two main kinds of bacteria. The first organisms make some gas, some carbon dioxide, and they make acetic acid and lactic acid. And acetic acid is kind of fruity. It has a aromatic flavor. They make a sugar alcohol called mannitol. And so this process uses up sugar and lowers pH. And what we can do with our models is tell you how quickly the pH will go down and what it'll go down to as the acid goes up. So that's sort of in a nutshell what it is. Yeah, so I've actually worked with a number of different Korean scientists on a number of different projects over the years. So I don't know where to start because we've had really great collaborative work with Korean scientists, and I guess one of my first major collaborations was Dr. Yoon Sung-sik of Yonsei University. He and his wife came to the U.S. and Dr. Yoon worked in my lab for 2 years, really. And we looked at bacterial viruses. He was an expert, and he isolated, I think, the very first bacterial virus from vegetable fermentations. Now, don't be scared of these viruses. These viruses don't infect humans. They only infect bacteria, right? And so they absolutely have nothing to do with anything other than bacteria. They're bacterial viruses active against bacteria. And so we wanted to know how, because these organisms are part of the ecology of the fermentation. And the ecology of the fermentation is really very important to know about if you want to know how, successful or good your kimchi is going to be. You need to know what the microorganisms are doing. And we never knew much about these organisms. And he was a pioneer. We had done some work in pickles, cucumber pickles, with the same kinds of, they're called bacteriophage. We don't call them bacterial viruses. We call them phage. And so he worked with these phage, and I was working with the phage, but with cucumber pickles. And so we got together and said, let's work together. And we published a number of papers together on these phage. And it was very productive work. That was, I think, probably my first collaboration. I worked with several other scientists at Kangwon University, Dr. Oh Duk-wan, and all these guys are retired now. So if you look them up, you won't find they're retired. If I was working in Korea, I would probably be retired too. But I'm still working in the U.S. But Dr. O was not only a collaborator, but also a very good friend. And we worked on how E. coli, Salmonella, and Listeria, the bad bugs, the ones you don't want, they die off in these fermentations. They can be present in fresh vegetables and other things because they're all over the place. They're pretty much everywhere in the world. And so the good thing about a kimchi fermentation is the acid that's produced kills these organisms off. And what we wanted to know was how quickly does that happen? And so he was a specialist in that. He worked with other food safety issues, kimbap. He worked some with that, how you can see how bacteria can be prevented from causing disease from foods like that. And finally, I guess my former colleague as a grad student, Dr. Kim Jae-ho, who I mentioned earlier, from Kyongsung University, came to my laboratory as a professor and scientist, and we worked on some organisms that cause a secondary fermentation in cucumber pickles, and it causes the pickles to spoil. And we wanted to know more about this. It's very rare, it almost never happens, but we published a paper on that as well. So those are probably the biggest collaborations I've had, but and now I'm starting a new collaboration with Dr. Park Hae-woon from Wee Kim. And Dr. Park has been a good friend and invited me to Gwangju last year. And so we have big plans to look at some of this buffer modeling and see where we can take that. So I'm not an expert in nutrition or in human health in terms of how foods can benefit your health and well-being. I do know that it's very good to have foods that have live microorganisms. Lactic acid bacteria in particular are in general, very healthy for people to eat because it gives you a mixed microbiota, which means a mixed microbial ecology in your intestines and your digestive system. And that's a healthy thing. You know, many people, particularly in the US, have diets that have very, very little microbial input. You know, if you eat a hamburger, or if you eat French fries, or if you eat, something that's cooked, stew or a soup or something, all those bacteria are killed by the heat. And so if you constantly eat a sterile diet, it's not good for your intestines in the long run, for your digestive system. You really want to have a mixed, I think, microbiota, which means a microbial ecology. You want to have this input of these different organisms. And the organisms that are in vegetable fermentations, including particularly kimchi, they have a lot of lactic acid bacteria, and these are what we call the good bugs. They're good for you in general. Now, I'm not using the term probiotic very directly here because many scientists consider probiotic to mean a very specific thing. Specific microorganisms, individual strains of lactic acid bacteria that have proven health effects are called probiotics, at least as a scientist talks about it. So I will say more generally that when you eat foods like kimchi, you're getting all of these healthful microorganisms, but I can't say very specifically exactly what the health effect will be. But in general, it's very good to have the input of these organisms. And kimchi is a wonderful source because it's not typically heated. You can cook foods with kimchi, and they're very delicious. But just this regular kimchi, which is not cooked, has a lot of healthy microorganisms in it. Yeah, I see a really bright future, and I'm greatly encouraged by Wee Kim researchers who are, to me, doing a wonderful job of looking at, all the possibilities that we have in front of us. My lab in the U.S. is one in a very big country, but very small lab, relatively speaking. I don't have all the resources that Wee Kim has, for example. We are working on trying to further understand the things that cause the changes in the microorganism, the populations of microorganisms. We want to understand that more precisely, and that's why we're doing these buffer models. The folks at WeChem are looking at many different aspects, and I don't know all the projects there, but many different aspects of kimchi in terms of health and safety. When you think about where we're going to go in the future, my career is near the end, but I can see down the road that I see a future where when people are making these fermentations, they can tailor the quality of the fermentation, the health effects of the fermentation to the needs and desires of the customers and consumers. What do people want? Well, they want healthful food. They want food that has wonderful flavors. And we can, sometimes when you're making a natural product like kimchi, you can get fermentations that differ from what you were planning. And it may be better. It may not be what you wanted. It can vary. And so I think in the future, there'll be much more control over, because we'll understand the technology of what's driving the changes in the microbial populations. And when we have that knowledge, when we can really see in great detail using sequencing methods, using methods like the buffer modeling, when we can really see what's going on, we'll know so much more. We'll be able to make the products. We could be able to tailor products to people's needs and desires. I think the applications will be great. When humans go into space, they're going to need healthy food. They're going to need food that they can preserve. I think kimchi is going to the moon. So that's the future.